Hey guys, Arjavantes here with another Prismata game analysis. Today I bring you two short replays which are more or less unrelated, but they both share the common theme that I get an early conduit and my opponent doesn't, and the green tech in the set allows me to blow the game wide open. In the first game, we have an Omega Splitter mirror, but I go for a conduit, whereas my opponent doesn't. So in this case, the green lets me get Xeno Guardian and Cluster Bolt, both of which are pretty good in the Omega mirror. Now, I went for the Xeno first, whereas my opponent just went for the blue. So he's actually going to be able to get the first Omega Splitter, which is pretty good. However, the Xeno Guardian over time will generate enough value to justify delaying my Omega a little bit. And here he does get the Omega Splitter, but I just respond with my own. And Xeno Guardian means that when he attacks for 4, I only lose 1 engineer instead of 2, which is pretty huge here. Now, usually in Omega Splitter mirrors, what happens is you leave back an Omega Splitter and you attack with the rest. So the Omega Splitter can absorb for 5, and your remaining Omega Splitters deal 3 damage each. However, if you have a Xeno Guardian, it's actually more effective to attack with all your Omega Splitters and just leave the Xeno on defense. And the reasoning is Xeno Guardian absorbs for 3, whereas Omega Splitter can absorb for 5. So Omega can absorb for 2 more damage than Xeno Guardian. However, the same Omega Splitter can attack for 3. So it's actually nets 1 damage if you attack with Omega Splitter instead of absorbing for 2 additional health on defense. So when you have the Xeno Guardian, it's actually more cost effective to attack with all of your Omega Splitters and just defend with the Xeno. So in this sort of situation, I'm able to attack with the Omega Splitter without too much trouble, and I can kind of just defend with the Force Field because I have the green anyways. And I get my second Omega Splitter. So here for my opponent, if he wants to attack with both Omega Splitters, then he's actually going to lose 2 walls on defense, and he won't be able to get his third Omega Splitter. So instead he decides just to leave the Omega Splitter back in order to squeeze in his third Omega. Myself on the other hand, once again I just attack with all my Omega Splitters, and I get my third one. And because I have access to the green, I'm able to buy Force Fields, which allow me to kind of sneak in the third Omega Splitter without being forced to buy a wall or something. And the thing is, my opponent isn't actually going to be attacking with all his Omegas, because especially right now, when I'm threatening 10 damage, if he doesn't absorb for 5, it's going to be a huge blow. So, while I have to kind of leave the drone back, just so he doesn't breach, he's not actually going to be killing the drone or anything. And instead, he actually has to leave back both the Steel Splitter and buy a wall in this situation. Whereas I'm able to just attack with all the Omegas. And here I actually don't buy the 4th Omega Splitter because I want to kind of just pressure him as much as possible. And the way to do so is to Cluster Bolt, which I had exactly enough green for. And in order to defend against my opponent, I just buy a Polywall here. Or rather, I buy 2 walls, which cost the exact same as a Polywall, except this gives me more granularity on defense. So I can just use 1 wall, for example. And once again, my opponent's forced to only attack with 2 Omega Splitters. So his output of damage every turn is actually only 6, whereas I'm doing at least 10 damage with my Omegas and Xeno Guardian. And even the Steel Splitter that he has, he can't attack with because he needs to defend my Cluster Bolts. So I basically force my opponent to devote his entire turn to defending. And in the interim, I'm able to sneak out my 4th Omega Splitter. And at this point, it's 4 Omega Splitters to 3. And I also have a Xeno Guardian, so the game's pretty much over. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Because of the Xeno Guardian, I was able to attack with all 4 Omega Splitters, and still defend with the help of some force fields. And also the cluster bolts in general made it so that he was forced to defend for a critical turn, which let me get my 4th Omega Splitter since he wasn't able to build damage on that turn. Pretty straightforward game. In the second game, we see Frostbrooder, Tia Thurnax, Sentinel, and Cauterizer, all of which will play a big role. So once again, I go for a Conduit as my first buy, because both Tia Thurnax and Sentinel are pretty strong in this set. And this is a set without too much going on, so it's very likely to deteriorate into the first person to be able to assemble damage and buy a Tia Thurnax winning. And that's actually exactly what happens. So he gets his Animus, and I also respond with an Animus. So once again, my opponent kind of has the tempo, just like last game with the Mega Splitters. And he chooses to get a Frostbrooder. So seeing the Frostbrooder, I actually go for a Sentinel, because Sentinel produces Engineers. And Frostbrooder is very good against walls, since walls only have 3 health, and Frostbrooder freezes for exactly 3, so it's a very efficient freeze. However, they're terrible against Engineers, because if you had just like a wall of 6 Engineers, it would take 6 Frostbites just to freeze all the Engineers, and each Frostbite only deals with 1 point of defense. So, highly inefficient. I go for a Frostbrooder of my own, because my game plan is actually to get a Tia Thurnax eventually, and just kill him. So with the Frostbrooder, I'm able to make it so that it'll be almost impossible for my opponent to defend. And I actually go for a Blast Forge here, because my plan is not to buy walls, but to buy Cauterizer, which also comes with 4 Engineers, and in general is just pretty strong. So in this situation, I actually leave my Sentinel back, and that's debatable. If I attack with the Sentinel, I would have produced 1 Engineer, and I would have lost 1 Engineer to the Rhino attack. But leaving it back means I kind of just soak up a damage on the Sentinel. So I traded 1 damage for 1 point of stamina, essentially. And in this situation, I leave back the Sentinel again, and I just go ahead and buy my Cauterizer. My opponent's only attacking for 2. So by leaving back the Sentinel, I kind of preserve 2 Engineers. And I kind of do want to save my Engineers. Otherwise, my Cauterizer won't be able to attack. So, though it is kind of questionable looking back at the game, because the Sentinel takes 4 turns of attacking to build up to its full value, getting 4 Engineers. So maybe I should be attacking with Sentinel. And in this case, my opponent has only 3 attack because he was kind of slow in ramping up his attack due to the fact that he got his Frostbrooder. But he has 9 freeze. But I just have a wall of Engineers, so 9 is actually not a very scary number for me, since it's actually only 3 freeze on my Engineers. So I just kind of laugh in his face, get my second Cauterizer, and yeah, build 1 more Engineer. So try as he may, he's only going to be able to kill 3 Engineers every turn, whereas I can easily replace that. And then, quite simply, I go and buy my Tia Thurnax. So at this point, I have 3 Frostbites and a Tia. Plus, the Cauterizers make for quite a bit of fast damage, if you will. You kind of get immediate damage with the Cauterizers, whereas the Tarsiers, you have to wait a turn. And I put my opponent in a very bad spot where he's just unable to defend. With 14 points of damage and 9 freeze, my opponent just resigns, because there's no way to really defend against this much damage with just walls, force fields, and rhinos. So yeah, pretty simple game really. If you notice, I didn't buy a single wall this game, or have any bit of absorb. But because Tia Thurnax was in the sets, and because I was able to build such a big engineer wall, any sort of absorb actually wasn't necessary. I was able to just crush my opponent with my Tia Thurnax. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed these 2 games. Both of them kind of showcase the power of green tech. And I'll see you guys next week. Until then, see you later.